Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparuta de sangamata satavara e sodavanta bhamunchantu satang. So this afternoon is a chance to reflect on the way it is. And I remember in the early years with Luang Por Cha and Wat Pah Pong, Luang Por Cha had a very effervescent personality. He was very charming and a person in general. And I would sit in a row. I was the most junior monk at the time, and he would climb into the high seat, and then I'd look at it. I had a direct view of his eyes, and all his personality seemed to be vacant before he started speaking. So it kind of surprised me, because when one was used to seeing Luang Por Cha with sparkling eyes and kind of a pleasant personality look, and then suddenly vacant, no Ajahn Chah. And later, as my insight increased, I realized that before he actually started speaking, his personality was dismissed, and he was just coming from emptiness, from pure aware emptiness. The silence that is apparent here and now. So when he gave a talk, then it would resonate in a way that just people who speak from their personalities, their intellectual knowledge, can't inspire us in the same way or give us the same impression. Being a monk is an experience that I really appreciate, because my cultural background is to be a person, to have a personality, to be somebody special. And being a monk, in the early years you were just a junior monk. Wearing the same robe, shaven head, same appearance. No kind of individuality was allowed. So this was quite a good reflection for someone who was programmed to want to be somebody, or felt he had to be somebody. And of course, for several years I was the only Western monk in the lineup, and so that gave me a special position, because I was taller than the other monks and obviously different. But the point of Luang Por Chah's no personality, no person, always seemed very important, because that sense of no personality, no Ajahn Chah, was a perception I'd never had in my life. You know, when you're brought up as a Christian, people talk about the sermon, whether it was good or right or wrong, or whether the priest's sermon, whether he was interesting or boring. So all these words about being a public figure, being in a position of where everybody's focused on you, to have to entertain or be a personality to draw people out, to leave some impression on others. So that was an experience, a reflective experience on my ego, how my ego works. And of course, like most Westerners, we're programmed to be doers, get things done, duties to perform. And this idea of I have to get something I don't have, or I've got to change the way I am. And as we oftentimes interpret Pali scriptures, we tend to think, I've got to get rid of the kilesas. I've got to get samadhi. I've got to get something, and I've got to get rid of something. And then we have duties to perform. And this is important for someone as to reflect on this sense of having to being someone who has duties to accomplish or expectations. And especially when you become head monk, the abbot of a monastery, then you feel you've got to be impeccable, you've got to be a role model, you've got to be really, you don't want to disappoint people or shock them. So then this becomes a burden when you have this kind of burden on your mind. I've got to do things, get things done. Be responsible. I remember the worst kind of insult someone could make to me was that I seemed irresponsible. Ajahn Sumedho's irresponsible, and I feel very upset by that. Because I'm programmed to want to be responsible. You must be responsible for this and that, performing the duties of a head monk or whatever position in the lineup you hold. And so there's always this sense of having to do something, prove something, get something. And in the holy life, the aspirations are very high. To get enlightened. I want to become enlightened. And so the way is to investigate this. It's not that it's wrong to think like this or feel these senses of being overwhelmed by duties to perform, obligations to be met, responsibilities that you have to take credit for. but to observe, be the witness to this sense. So I would deliberately think, I am responsible. I am the head monk, senior monk, and I'm responsible. And I'd listen to this listening, this Buddho way of paying attention to thoughts. I am somebody who has to do something, prove something. It's like this. Now, investigating this doesn't mean that I was judging it or trying to get rid of it, thinking I shouldn't, there's something wrong with feeling dutiful or responsible. But there's a way of looking at these kind of perceptions from the position of Buddho, because the sense of a doer is a created sense. If I am this human body, then I have to do something with it. So on one level, it's logical, makes sense, because that's what we do. We grow up and we go to school, we have relationships with others, and we get work, jobs, family, we grow old. But the Buddho is not an aging proposition. The Buddha is a witness to the way it is, the changing conditions of our physical forms, the bodies grow up, get old, and die. The Buddha is a witness to, I have to do something, get rid of something, attain something, or not do anything. Whatever we think. So a lot of my emphasis these days is on thinking. It's to point out the limitations of thoughts, of words. Because as human beings, this is one of the gifts we have, is that we think. We have languages. We can praise or blame or pass judgments, good or bad, right or wrong, on experience. And so we become enslaved with our own blessing because we identify with what we think and what we physically are. Now the Buddho is not a person. It's not like the Buddha or, some image we have of Buddha. It's a useful technique to use to break through the rapid thinking process that we all have. So thinking is something to witness to, not to try to think yourself into enlightenment, because you can't do it. It's by letting go and witnessing the way it is. Whatever thoughts arise, cease. Whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, feel is impermanent, and we can witness that. In the early stages of vipassana, you examine this very much, investigating the impermanence of our sensory experiences, because experience is sensual. silence is not an experience. Consciousness, pure consciousness, is not an experience. Where seeing is an experience, and hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, these are all experiences because they come and go and change according to other conditions. So we oftentimes want to have experiences, interesting experiences, because silence is not interesting. So ultimate reality is not interesting or exciting. So why are we trying to become enlightened? Well, at first it's with the delusion that being enlightened will be happy forever after. We think of enlightenment as some personal, blissful, eternal blissful state of joy and happiness. So that makes it desirable. Enlightenment is a word that creates desire. We want it. But the witness, the Buddha, is aware of wanting to become enlightened as a person. And when I was at the beginning of this reflection about Luang Por Sumedho not being a person, before he started speaking, he was sitting on a high seat in front of everybody, but he wasn't smiling, waving, or being charming in any way. Just his eyes would go kind of dead, like fish eyes. There was no person there, but there was consciousness, which wasn't a personal experience, like Luang Por Sumedho's pure state of awareness wasn't his personal quality. It was the natural state of being that we began to recognize through awareness. So like Dhamma, the word Dhamma is a Pali word translated as ultimate reality, absolute reality, supreme reality. Can you think more superlative words than absolute, supreme, highest? Just try to think of a greater compliment in words. Absolute is very good, isn't it? It's something that's absolute, eternal. Supreme is the very, very best. Top of the heap. And with thinking, can you get beyond supreme? Supremist, you maybe get away with that. Or the absolute supreme. Just contemplate how our words, are artifices. They're sankharas, they're conditions that change. And no matter how we can think in superlatives, that's the best we can do. We can't imagine enlightenment. We make images of it with words, concepts. Supreme bliss. That sounds very nice. To spend eternity in supreme bliss. But when to a personality, to a person that wants interesting experiences, that would be rather boring when you think of it. Supreme bliss. Because we see excitement, romance, adventure. These are entertainments, these are experiences. So it's me as a separate person doing something to feel excited, have an interesting experience. Is there anything wrong with that? Am I saying it's wrong? No, I'm just saying that's not the enlightenment to the highest superlatives you can possibly think in any language can't reach. Because it's beyond good and bad, right and wrong. It's here and now. So enlightenment is your natural state. It's tamada, tamachat, part of the Dhamma. Where we think of somebody as enlightened as being special. They're highly attained, but then we start using superlatives again. He's a stream enterer. Wow. That one is an arahant. And so we project even these words onto others who we believe are enlightened, separate people. But as long as we see ourselves through the limitation of forms, conditions, phenomena, that never becomes enlightened because it's basically impermanent. It changes. So the Big Bang factor is one where you have the insight through awareness that you're not anything at all. You're not a thing. You're not a male or female, monk or nun, lay person. And then the personality in regards to being nobody, nothing. That's not how we have been conditioned by culture. To be and you say somebody's a nobody, that's an insult. They're not interesting, they're not romantic, they're not beautiful, they're boring, they're nobody. And yet, enlightenment is nobody. And yet, the word itself, enlightenment, sounds like being really somebody. I'm an enlightened monk, not just one of those ordinary monks that does chanting. That really sounds incredibly conceited to me, to be somebody special. So how we use these conventions of Theravada Buddhism, it's not to grasp the convention, because that's what we're used to doing. We can say Theravada Buddhism is the best form of Buddhism, or the original is the Buddhist teaching. It's pure. And I'm a Theravadan Buddhist, so I'm not one of those that just believes in other things. And that's conceit, isn't it? That's personal identity with a convention, a very good convention. But grasping the convention turns you into somebody who becomes a Buddhist, a Theravadan Buddhist, rather than enlightened. So those who feel overwhelmed by duties to perform, not criticizing it, but just to use it as a way of witnessing who is overwhelmed. And then we think, well, people expect me to perform all these duties, and I'm overwhelmed by it. Being overwhelmed is like this. Minyang ni eng, it's like this. So you become the witness to the feeling of being overwhelmed rather than the person that's overwhelmed. Because what you really are can never be overwhelmed. The pure, absolute reality of Dhamma never gets overwhelmed by all the duties or conditions that one has to live with or do or get. To speak like this makes it sound very simple, but it takes a real determination and patience to do this continually. Until you have that sudden overwhelming insight into you are the absolute reality. I am the absolute reality, not this body, this personality. But then the words, I am the absolute reality, I am Dhamma, are just words too. So if we cling to the words, then we become arrogant, conceited. If I tell people I'm the absolute reality, that don't trust me. Because it's not something you say, but what you really are. You don't have to announce tamada, tamacha, the Dhamma is like this. These forms are illusory forms, they're changing, they're dependent on conditions that we can't control. And the silence behind the thoughts, I am the absolute reality. That's absolute reality, the silence, not the words, not the form. So it's not trying to be nobody, because that can be a form of conceit too. I'm just nobody. If I grasp that as a position I take on life, then it's still a form of a self-identification. This form is nobody, it's just an empty form going through the process of change, old age, sickness, death. That's quoting the scriptures and using the teachings. But the teachings are not to be grasped. They're to encourage us to realize, to wake up. Like Buddha is awakened consciousness, not a person that's enlightened. So consciousness, through the senses, functions in the world. It's for survival in the world. We have to eat and sleep and clothe ourselves, and survive in oftentimes very difficult conditions. So sense consciousness is very impermanent. Emotions, what are they? Sometimes we feel happy, sad, angry, frightened. Are these, and we can oftentimes blame the negative emotions on others. Because that's what we're programmed to do. I have a lot of fear that it's somebody's fault. I shouldn't. I should be brave and fearless is the ideal. But I'm weak and frightened, man, and I know I'm admitting my weaknesses. Might sound honest and straightforward speech, but it's all deluded. Whose fault is it that I'm this way? My mother, my father, my religion, abuse given to me as a child. There's a lot of that kind of blame going on. Abusing people. And it's caused permanent damage to my emotions. So this kind of thinking is not wisdom, it's just part of a cultural conditioning, a way we've been programmed, positioned to translate experiences into very personal qualities. So the sensory consciousness is very delicate. The senses are delicate. Emotions are, this is a sense experience is an emotional one. To be blissed out, taking drugs is an experience through the senses. So it's impermanent. You become addicted to it because you want the bliss, the joy, the high feelings that chemicals can give you, a mind. a rest from the self-criticizing, feeling like you're nobody or unimportant. Misunderstood, unappreciated. So these are natural emotions for us, jealousy and fear, paranoia, because this realm that we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think is scary. It is suffering because it's beyond our control as an individual form. We're quite helpless in a universe that we have no power over, that we see as something separate and frightening, and it is. When you think of the jungle, all the scary predictions about climate change, all the news about AI and robots taking over, these are scary perceptions. And yet, for the news, you hear the news and you hear all the kind of misery that many people are experiencing. And you feel glad to not be caught in a war zone. But one can imagine what it would be like to live in Kiev right now, or Gaza, South Sudan, Venezuela. There's endless wars, conflicts. So, when I look at my life here at Amaravati, I think how fortunate I am to live in such a peaceful place where these terrible things aren't happening to me, just old age. So being part of the process of change, where this body gets older each day, death is not far away. But my refuge is Dhamma, not in the body. Not to take refuge in identity and belief that you are a very delicate, sensual form that's programmed to get old, get sick, and die. But to see your true nature is absolute reality, pure consciousness that is apparent here and now and timeless. So I keep trying to remind you of what you really are, whether you believe me or not, something else. But purpose of these kind of reflections to put this into consciousness of all of you here, into your consciousness. Are you really what you think and believe, feel, see, hear, smell, taste, touch? Are you really this limited creation that's subject to all kinds of conditions of climate, disease, pandemics, wars, humiliation, abuse? So to wake up is to realize Dhamma is your true nature. Dhamma is absolute reality, pure consciousness, apparent here and now and timeless. So in the morning, evening chanting, we repeat this, chant this over and over, apparent here and now, timeless. And they become just empty chants words that we, part of a ceremony. But they do have an influence, like just that reflection on Dhamma, apparent here and now. Then ask yourself, what is apparent here and now? And of course it changes. If we just look at it through sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. If that's all that's apparent here and now is our thoughts and our sensory experiences, they're always changing, and we can observe that. This observer, this Bhutto, doesn't change. It's the deathless reality that we all come to places like Amaravati to realize for ourselves. So I offer this as a reflection.